There has been a lot of angst amongst BYU fans for BYU's supposed lack of recruiting adequate talent at the quarterback position. Might Nolan Keeny be the answer to BYU fans' prayers at that position? We're talking about him. We're also talking about Chay Bryant-Strather might be able to offer to the BYU football program as well. It's all ahead on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who are everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. And BYU got some good news on the recruiting front yesterday on two different fronts. We'll start off on the offense, though, talking about Nolan Keeny out of Tualatin High School in Tualatin, Oregon. What does he offer to the BYU football program? Well, he is a high-level prospect. Now, his recruiting ranking obviously won't necessarily say that. Rated as an 86 according to 24/7 Sports. This is a young man who is just barely seemingly getting started when it comes to his recruiting process. Now, a lot of you may understand what the recruiting process entails, but let me school the rest of you to the game, as it were. When a prospect is coming up, your sophomore year is when you start to show promise. That's when a lot of football programs, BYU among them, will start to pay attention to young men. Junior season, so the junior year for a lot of prospects, is a make or break year for a lot of them. You go out there, you blow up your junior season, and then it's game on as programs start to engage you, start to offer you in droves, and then you essentially get to pick where you want to play. Well, if you have issues that junior year, namely typically injury, that can hurt, obviously, your chances of that. And that's exactly what Nolan Keeny went through this past year. Had a collarbone injury that knocked him out for a good portion of his junior season. He got healthy enough to return for a playoff run and then got injured once again in the state championship game. That lack of film, I believe, has knocked down his recruiting prospects out there, and BYU very, very well may benefit from that. He's had fairly modest statistics throughout his high school career to this point, 14 touchdowns against 5 interceptions most recently. So those aren't numbers they're going to have every coach in America dialing up Tualatin, Oregon, and saying, all right, Nolan, what's the story here? BYU did their homework on him. Aaron Roderick, obviously the lead recruiter in this circumstance, being the offensive coordinator as well as quarterbacks coach. I'm sure that Matt Mitchell is BYU's graduate assistant, or not graduate assistant, offensive analyst over the quarterback position. I'm sure did a lot of film study as well. And ultimately, it's paid off in the form of Nolan Keeny committing to the BYU football program. I said in the open of today's show, there's been a lot of BYU fans, and y'all know who you are. And trust me, you're not alone. There's thousands of you out there who have been upset with the way BYU's gone about recruiting the quarterback position, trying to add depth and talent, frankly, to that position group. BYU's got a lot of quarterbacks on the roster right now, but how many of them truly are difference makers? That is anybody's guess. Is Jake Retzlaff really always cracked up to be coming out of the junior college ranks? Is Gerry Bohanon capable of putting the magic he had that one season at Baylor back on the field for BYU? Is McCae Hillstead capable of overcoming the injury concerns that have plagued him throughout his high school and so far in his college career and really become the player that a lot of people believe he can be? Maybe so. But until one of those guys proves it, BYU has got a big fat question mark at the quarterback position. Enter Nolan Keeny into the conversation. Like I said, a mid 3-star prospect, but his recruiting profile screams to me a potential star in the making for BYU. And why do I say that? Well, first off, he's got more than adequate size. He's got premier size for the quarterback position. 6'4", some list him at 190 pounds. I've seen his listed as big as 220 pounds. That is more than adequate size for a high school player to come into the Division I, more importantly, the Power 4 level, and contribute for BYU. He is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so there's obviously the big question mark is if he will go on a mission and when he would do that. Will he begin his career and then go, or will he opt to spend 2 years in the mission field before enrolling at BYU? The biggest thing I believe about what Nolan Keeny offers to BYU is hope for Cougar fans. What do I mean by hope? Hope that Aaron Roderick is not the quote-unquote buffoon that you may think he is when it comes to recruiting the quarterback position. Some of you would have me believe, and would have many believe, that Aaron Roderick has never recruited a good quarterback in his entire coaching career, including his stint at Utah. I can tell you that he absolutely has recruited good quarterbacks. He was in on the Zach Wilson recruitment to BYU, even though he wasn't on staff at the time officially. It was also a big part of convincing Dallin Hall when he came home off of a mission, because remember, Dallin committed to Bronco Mendenhall. When he returned from a mission, there were options for him all over to go elsewhere. And Aaron Roderick and the BYU Brain Trust, Kalani Sitake included, were able to convince him to remain at BYU. Both of them are NFL quarterbacks. Yes, I know that Zach has not lived up to the billing as the number 2 overall pick. And a lot of that says, I think, more about the New York Jets than Zach. And also Dallin Hall, he was a mid-round pick of the Minnesota Vikings, and we'll see what ultimately his career holds for him. But they were both NFL caliber quarterbacks, and BYU benefited from having them in the system back to back. BYU got a little bit burned when the pipeline essentially ran dry because of a guy in Baylor Romney deciding to stop playing football and move on with his life. Baylor Romney was in line to be the next quarterback in the kind of the list or the assembly line, as it were, for BYU, and he decided to opt against a continuous playing career. I am convinced, and I'm not saying that Baylor is an NFL quarterback by any means, but any of you who watched Baylor play saw a more than adequate Division I quarterback, and I believe he would have kept the assembly line rolling for BYU had he decided to keep going with his playing career. Well, when that did not occur, BYU was forced to kind of go back to square one and try and find options out there. And that's where it's led to today's situation, where you have 3 really unproven guys and a host of bodies beyond that really don't scream much to me personally. So that is why I believe Nolan Keeny can offer hope to BYU fans. Watch his film. When he is healthy, this is a young man who has got the arm, the athleticism, the body that look like a potential QB1 down the line for BYU. Now, it will take some time for him ultimately to assume that title if he really does realize that potential. That's the other thing about this. It's all based on potential. High school recruiting, for those of you who are also unaware on that, you're projecting 2 and 3 years down the line, trying to guess what a guy is going to do, his body's going to do, what he's going to ultimately look like 2 or 3 years down the line. And even when you throw in the whole thing with a mission, that also throws you for a loop, because you don't know how necessarily guys are going to return from a mission, if their athleticism will hold, have they gained a bunch of weight, have they lost a bunch of weight, where do things stand with them in terms of their ability to contribute to a football program. It is a complete crapshoot, but it is my belief, just based on what I've seen from Nolan Keeny and everything I've read about him, is that he offers that hope that BYU fans want to have, that the future of the quarterback position is not as drastic or as dire as it may seem. The other guy to keep an eye on, I know he's going on the mission, he may have just barely left not that long ago, is Enoch Watson. I'll tell you, based on multiple conversations I had with folks in and around the BYU football program, they believe that Enoch Watson is an absolute stud in the making for the BYU football program. What will he look like after he returns from his mission? We'll see. But I believe that potentially Enoch Watson and then shortly thereafter, Nolan Keeny could get BYU back into the quarterback sweepstakes, the quarterback era that Aaron Roderick had going for a little while there. It's going to take some time to get to that. And the hope is, let's also insert this. The hope is that Jake Retzlaff, McCae, Hillstead, or Gerry Bohanon, or a combination of the 3, tide BYU over until then. Hopefully, fingers crossed, one of those guys, or maybe 2 of them, in the case if a Gerry Bohanon were to start this year, you'd have somebody take over for the next year or 2 beyond that, ostensibly a guy like McCae, Hillstead, and then you get BYU, the assembly line, rolling again. That is the hope that it works out, that the gamble BYU is taking and saying that one of these unproven guys that is not thrilled really to any point so far is going to end up being the guy for BYU, and then it's all smooth sailing from there. There's always the big conversation, though, of NIL, transfer portal, and the like. What will the future hold for BYU? It's anybody's guess, but I believe that Nolan Keeny is the latest hope. Like, once again, the hope is the word I'm going back to. It's the word of the day for those of you out there who like to use that when it comes to the comments on the show. Hope is the word of the day for BYU when it comes to the quarterback position. That hope is that Nolan Keeny is him for the BYU football program. All right. What does Chay Bryant-Strother, offer to the BYU football program? We'll flip over to the defense and what he could bring to BYU as he transfers in from UCLA. We'll get to that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Now, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive, my friends. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered, my friends. With over 122 million parts, your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive once again at ebaymotors.com. It's, of course, eligible items only. Exclusions apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen to the day. I want to remind you guys, if you have not checked it out already, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today. It is your daily go-to when it comes to all the biggest stories in sports. You want to recap a game one of the NBA Finals, you can do that. You want a preview of the Stanley Cup playoffs, the NHL the Finals, you can do all of that with our friends at Locked On Sports Today. It's available on YouTube, or also available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app for free as well. Check it out. It's Locked On Sports Today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, some of you may have seen the news before Nolan Keeny committed to BYU. It was a double commitment day for BYU. The first commitment of the day coming in the form of Chay Bryant-Strather from UCLA, a transfer defensive lineman, pass rusher, linebacker. Nobody really quite sure what he is, but he comes to BYU with 2 years of eligibility remaining. Now, if his last name sounds familiar, it should. He is the younger brother of former BYU basketball star, Elijah Bryant. Now, Chay was a guy that BYU offered out of high school and had high hopes they could bring him into the BYU football program, but he opted to go to Pasadena and play for the UCLA Bruins. Has it really played out to any significant degree for him at UCLA? I would say probably not, because he's seen quite a bit of action in his time as a UCLA Bruin. 11 games a year ago, credited with 10 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a sack against North Carolina Central on the season. But then also 13 games with 2 starts in 2022, one game of action in 2021, and then 7 games at linebacker and special teams in 2020. So he's had quite a bit of game action, but really is not locked down and never really locked down a position that was all his own at UCLA. Now, I would say, just based on reading up on this, it's more about UCLA not knowing what to do with him versus him maybe not fitting what UCLA was looking for. He started his career as an inside linebacker, then was moved to outside linebacker. This past season, he was playing defensive line for UCLA. So it's anybody's guess ultimately what Jay Hill and the BYU defense will do with Chay Bryant-Strather. But the biggest thing I believe that he offers to the BYU football program, and why I believe this is a very, very nice pickup for BYU, is, remember, last year when Ben Bywater went down due to injury, was BYU ever able to really adequately replace what he offered to the BYU football program? No, they weren't. Frankly, they were just not able to replace his production. You need guys who have experience at this level, and at the bare minimum, at the very base level of what Chay Bryant-Strather brings to the BYU football program is power for experience. He's experienced it his entire career. He's played 4 seasons to this point, but he still has 2 years of eligibility remaining because of the COVID year. Obviously, that plays into this. So he will have 2 seasons to show what he's capable of as a Cougar. And I am hopeful that he can come in and, like I said, once again, the baseline offers that experience that BYU so desperately needs at the linebacker position, having experience at the power 4 level, but also anything you get out of him in terms of production, it feels like would be a win. I would imagine he is probably going to play more in the role of a Jack Kelly. Well, remember, what Jack Kelly is coming to BYU as is kind of that jack of all trades, not to use the pun on his name, so pardon that. But Jack Kelly is expected to be a pass rusher. He's expected to be a true linebacker. He's expected to do it all for the BYU defense. And Chay Bryant-Strather, his skill set suggests he will fall in a similar mold. 6'3", 235 pounds. He's built very similarly size-wise to a Jack Kelly. And I am excited to see what Chay offers to BYU. And the best part about it is he continues on a family legacy as he ends up at BYU, a place I wanted him to be all along. I remember watching this kid, his highlight reel out of high school down there in the Atlanta area, and I was like, man, this kid could be the next great inside linebacker for BYU. Well, I wasn't the only one. He was a top 20 inside linebacker by 24/7 Sports, number 17 in the country. ESPN had him at number 11 in the inside linebacker. Just an incredible athlete, even though he was a 3-star prospect overall. It looked like the future was going to be very, very bright for him, but it just never came to fruition at UCLA. Will it come to fruition at BYU? That is yet to be determined. That story has to be written over time. But I really think this is a savvy pickup for BYU, especially, once again, as it offers some much-needed depth to the linebacker position. This is a BYU defense that is still going through a transformation under Jay Hill, and they are obviously not a finished product, nor will they be a finished product this season. It's probably going to take another recruiting cycle or two, I believe, before Jay Hill has all of the quote-unquote horses he wants to get out there and run what he wants to do on defense. If you want to know what BYU's running on defense and what the goal is down the line, just watch the University of Utah's defense. Watch what Kyle Whittingham puts out there and Morgan Scalley put out there on defense. I know that's like a hiss and a byword to invoke Utah on this podcast, but it's exactly what BYU is trying to build. Will they be successful with it? That also remains to be determined. But I think that Chay Bryant-Strather is the right type of pickup right now when it comes to the transfer portal. The pickings are getting very slim out there when it comes to portal options, honestly. BYU picked up 2 offensive linemen, Isaiah Jada, as well as Austin Leausa, and I think both of them are very savvy pickups on the O-line. It felt like BYU needed to get a body or two on the defensive front 7. In this case, Chay Bryant-Strather offers kind of both. He could play some defensive end if need be, but also can offer the linebacker a depth that you so desperately crave for BYU. And I think that is a nice pickup. The biggest thing now for BYU is how many more guys can they really, in theory, bring out of the transfer portal. Obviously, McCae Hillstead was a quarterback addition via the portal. I still think BYU needs to get a cornerback on the defensive backfield side just to add depth, similar to what Chay Bryant-Strather offers at minimum. A guy who's got experience at this level can come in, challenge guys like Jacob Robinson and or Mark Collins for playing time. Maybe just beat them out and essentially start for BYU, because that's the opportunity a guy like Chay Bryant-Strather brings to BYU. He's going to come in. He's going to have to learn the playbook. He's going to have to get up to speed very quickly on that. He has the summer to do that, obviously. He's got the next couple of months to get up to speed ahead of training camp beginning in August. But more importantly, once you get on the field, show what you're capable of. You've got a blank slate in the case of Bryant-Strather as he comes into BYU now, because he is a guy that BYU, I think, when they were projecting ahead, saw one thing, and now that they're looking back at how things have developed at UCLA, maybe thinking something different. And it's also the different defensive staff that recruited him and got him to commit to BYU this time. Back then, it was Elijah Tualatin and Ed Lamb. Now it's Jay Hill leading the charge. And one thing I can say about Jay Hill, just on a side here, is that Jay Hill, there's one thing I know about Jay. He's very good at his projections. He looks at guys, understands what their physical capabilities are, and then essentially can, in his mind's eye, project where they're going to be most effective. And that's why I believe that he is taking this gamble on Bryant-Strather and bringing him into this football program and giving him an opportunity to compete. Will he ultimately become a stud starting linebacker for BYU that the Cougars are very excited to have in the program? I don't know. I would guess maybe it's a bet against that at this point in his career. But once again, the worst that can come out of this is a guy who understands what it takes to compete at this level of football, and he can offer that experience factor to some of his teammates who are coming up through the ranks and still trying to get adapted to playing Power 4 level football. You would hope at this point, a year in, that most of them have that experience and have an understanding of what it's going to take to compete for BYU, but you can never have too much experience on the defensive side of the football, and that's why I think that Bryant-Strather is the right option to pick BYU at this point. For BYU to pick him and him to pick BYU, I guess it's a two-way deal. But I think this is a savvy pickup, and I am hopeful that it has the ending, as it were, that both parties are looking for. In the case of BYU, a guy that I believe can be in the 2 deep at minimum right now for BYU, and if he ends up as a starter, great. And then in the case of Bryant-Strather, he's looking just essentially to be able to play out his career and live his dream more fully than maybe he realized it in Pasadena. So Congratulations to Chay. I'm going to see if I can get him on the podcast at some point here soon to talk about it, because I want to hear more about his story, because obviously his brother is a legend amongst BYU fans, still playing professional basketball overseas, has a NBA title ring with the Milwaukee Bucks. It's an incredible family legacy that he's carrying on, but he's doing it in a different sport. So I'd love nothing more than get him on the podcast, and we will endeavor to do so in coming days. All right, we will round out today's show, flipping over to basketball for just a little bit. First opportunity to really have some media availability with Kevin Young. We also got a chance to catch up with Dallin Hall. What did I take away from BYU's first week of summer workouts? We'll talk about that next as you roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you've not done so already, please sign up for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. I make this plea every day on the podcast, and I will continue to make the plea every single day for the foreseeable future. It's a great way to interact with the show. I'm passing along insider tidbits, getting the news to you the minute it breaks on a lot of things. Like, for example, the Chay Bryant-Strather situation. I sent out a text to our Locked On Cougars Insider Group the second it went down, getting them up to speed on that. Anything you want to know about BYU sports, you feel free. The best part is it comes to you via a text message. It doesn't get much more direct than that. And the best part is you can text back with your thoughts as well. And trust me, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time over the past few months, you know that we use those comments and those questions quite heavily. And if you guys want to have that interaction, please join us on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. The link to join it is in the show notes below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, and the like. Please consider signing up. 14-day free trial, $5 a month after that, and supports the show as well financially. So a big thank you to all of you for your support in any way, shape, or form you're capable of offering that. All right. Before we go on today's show, let's talk some basketball. We had a chance to be out at BYU, the Marriott Center Annex yesterday to catch up with Kevin Young. And he continues to be a guy that's a fascinating character to me. You can tell he's a little bit reserved, it feels like, as compared to what we experienced with the showman that was Mark Pope. And I'm not saying that either approach is a bad thing. It's just, it's kind of a stark contrast between the two guys when it comes to the way they interact with the media. But I do appreciate the fact that Kevin Young is not afraid to state exactly what he envisions and what he wants to BYU basketball to be. And that's, he wants him to be a factory for the NBA. He is trying to bring the NBA model to college basketball. I think it's an absolutely genius idea in this day and age. Remember, the days of quote unquote amateurism in college sports, they're dead and gone. So forget the fact that they're playing for more than just money. You know what, folks? A lot of it comes down to dollars and cents. That's why Dallin Hall, he said that when he talked to the media yesterday, I went into the transfer portal to learn more about myself. I just kind of insert, I wanted to learn about my NIL valuation. How much money is available to me on the open market? And BYU made it worth his while to come back to Provo. That's an awesome get to get him to come back to BYU. And I think that also Dallin Hall looked at what the track record of what Kevin Young has proven as a coach and said, you know what, this guy has a very good chance of getting me to where I want to be, and that is the NBA. So I'm going to trust that he's got what he is trying to do. Now, the other thing about it is Kevin Young knows exactly what NBA coaching staffs have become, and they are large. Trust me, very, very large. They're player development coaches that is essentially number one-to-one in a lot of franchises when it comes to one coach working with one player on their specific skills, getting them to be the best player they possibly can be. Most NBA franchises look at these players, for lack of a better term, as an investment. They are an asset that needs to be enhanced, needs to be developed, needs to essentially be able to pay off down the road in some form or fashion, whether that's via trade, whether that's via leading to an NBA championship, or whatever the other goal or goals might be for these players. Well, you can't have one-to-one in college basketball because NCAA rules stipulate you can only have 5 assistant coaches. Well, Kevin Young has brought in 5 assistant coaches, all of which have proven at different levels to be player development type guys. And that is a benefit, I think, for BYU to have these 5 guys. Essentially, you're going to have 13 roster players. And if Kevin Young wants to get into it as well, they'll have 6 coaches who can work with these players on court in terms of their skill development. Now, also graduate assistants will also play into this. Essentially, you can have 2-to-1. And so as close as you can get in the college ranks on the skill development side, And I'm envisioning, let's say, for example, Chris Burgess, a big man who was an elite talent back in his day. Remember, he was the number one recruit in the country, went to Duke and Utah, and was a very, very good player before injuries really hampered what he tried to accomplish on the court. Well, what he can offer is he is an elite big man and understands what it takes to develop big men. Well, there's a big reason why Keba Keita followed him to BYU. Fousseyni Traore's got to be licking his chops, thinking of working once again with a guy like Chris Burgess. Now, you also look at a guy like Will Voigt. Well, Will Voigt is considered to be a defensive genius. He's developed the peel and the peel and switch defense, something that's in the NBA and something that a lot of teams subscribe to defensively. Well, he's the innovator of it. He's going to be able to offer that to BYU's guard line, essentially any other player on the roster who wants to understand it better. The player development aspect of the staff is being overlooked in all of this. Kevin Young understands what it's going to take to get these young men to the NBA because he did that at the NBA level. He has brought elite talents through a workout regimen and has been able to yield some of the better talents in NBA history of late. Remember, guys like a Devin Booker swear by Kevin Young. Well, Kevin Young can bring that same prowess to the college game and help BYU players get better, and that is going to ultimately be beneficial to everybody in the BYU basketball program. The recruiting chops, great. He talked about the fact that every one of the coaches he brought in have recruiting connections, whether it's overtime elite in the case of Tim Fanning, the college ranks in terms of the opportunities to go the transfer portal route with guys like Brandon Dunson and or Chris Burgess. The high school ranks with other members of his staff. They have got, and by the way, European ranks as well, going overseas and having those opportunities to recruit overseas as well. That yielded Yeager Denham most recently. And that obviously, I think is going to be a big avenue for BYU to lean into in terms of getting talent into the program. But I really appreciate the way that Kevin Young has stated his goals and he's working diligently towards those goals. He's not going to, he's a straight shooter. There is no fluff with Kevin Young. And I have got a pretty good, I term it a BS meter at this point in my professional career as a journalist and as a sports media professional. There's a lot of folks that you can kind of see through them. Okay, that's a bunch of, being spewed forth by them. Kevin Young isn't that. I don't get any sense of him having any guile, to use that expression, because he is a guy that he just wants to be successful. He loves hoops. He loves developing players, and he wants those players to go on and have the careers that they want. And he sees his role as BYU basketball head coach right now to be a guy that's going to be able to yield the results that those players want. And it's going to take player development. It's obviously going to take results on the court. These players got to be able to go out there and compete at the highest levels in college basketball, most notably in the Big 12, and show that they can hang with these players. If all that pays off, then great. BYU is going to become that NBA factory, and they're going to have more and more NBA scouts stopping by Provo, Utah to see what the latest crop of talent is in Provo. To consider the fact that BYU could end up being a destination for NBA scouts to come and check out talent would be an incredible end result of all this. But I can really appreciate the way that Kevin Young is approaching things. And he has been one-track mind, it feels like, so far. Filling out his roster, he says he plans to add all 13 scholarships. He plans to fill those out before training camp begins. But he says the final 2 scholarships that are open, any one of them are available, and BYU could chase them a number of different ways. We'll see what happens. I still think BYU needs size on the interior. Find a 6'11", 7-footer. We had Jeff Hansen on the podcast on Monday, and he made it a very good point. Even if that 7-footer essentially is just there to yield 5 fouls for you on the defensive end and to protect that rim a little bit, you take it, I think, at this point, because I think the rotation by and large is set just based on the talent I think has been assembled by Kevin Young at this point. But I think you need some size, and I think he alluded to that he wants some positional size. I think it's more important on the front court side of things, but I really do appreciate the way that Kevin Young goes about stuff. And I don't mean to come off as a fanboy. I sense from him that he has got a very, very specific goal and goals in mind for BYU, and that's all he's working towards. There's no ulterior motive. There's no other eyes elsewhere on other opportunities like a guy like Mark Pope. Trust me, Mark Pope had his eyes out all the time at other opportunities. Doesn't seem like Kevin Young has that. He is focused on the here and now and building something that's sustainable and can have success with BYU. And if you're a Cougar fan, I'd be excited to have that guy on your sideline. All right, there you go. That's my impression, taking it away from BYU yesterday. All right, that's going to do it for today's show. A big thank you to all of you for your support. Now, to make up for the one I missed on Tuesday, I did a crossover edition with JT Wisterso from Locked On Utes. Had a very fun conversation about a bunch of what ifs involving BYU and Utah. Had Kyle Whittingham back in 2010 taken the Tennessee Volunteers job, which, according to Kalani Sitake earlier this week, was as close to happening as it probably could have been without actually happening. What would have happened? We'll have that podcast for you in a special edition coming out later today. I'm hoping to have it out by this afternoon. Well, if not, we'll have it out by tomorrow at the very latest, but stay tuned for that. All right, so there you go. That's what's on tap for you guys. Of course, we'll have all the news from the weekend that was BYU sports covered for you guys on Monday as well. So enjoy your weekend. Have some fun out there. Stay cool if you're here in Utah. It is hot out there, but regardless, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you once again who are everydayers with us here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And until next time, this has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.